What if I told you the biggest trade war in North American history wasn't going to be about steel or cars, but a carton of milk? That the linchpin holding together over $1 trillion in commerce wasn't a microchip, but a block of cheese? It sounds absurd. It sounds impossible. And yet, this is the reality we're facing. An economic conflict of unprecedented scale is brewing between the United States and Canada, threatening to tear apart the USMCA, the trade deal that governs the entire continent. At the center of this storm are two powerful, unyielding figures. In one corner, U.S. President Donald Trump, who has returned to the White House with an iron will to dismantle what he sees as unfair trade practices. His target, Canada's heavily protected $20 billion dairy market. He's demanding total unrestricted access, and he's willing to burn the whole system down to get it. In the other corner, Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney. A former central banker steeped in the world of global finance now finds himself in a political fight for his life. He's not just facing down a notoriously aggressive U.S. president. He's legally trapped. A brand new Canadian law, a legislative fortress built around the dairy industry, makes it impossible for him to concede to Trump's demands. This isn't a negotiation. It's a collision course, a high-stakes game of economic chicken where the livelihoods of millions, the stability of our supply chains, and the future of the North American alliance hang in the balance. This is the story of how a fight over milk could trigger an economic reckoning, a brutal showdown with consequences that will ripple far beyond the farm gate. To understand how we got to the brink, you have to understand the strange and often infuriating world of Canadian dairy. For decades, it has been the single greatest irritant in the U.S.-Canada trade relationship. While almost every other sector was opened up by free trade, dairy remained a protected kingdom. The system guarding this kingdom is called supply management. Think of it like a velvet rope at the world's most exclusive nightclub. The club is the Canadian dairy market, and the bouncers are the federal government. They decide exactly how much milk, cheese, and butter get inside. This system stands on what insiders call a three-legged stool. The first leg is production control. Farmers can't just produce as much milk as they want. They own a quota, which is basically a license to produce a set amount. This is designed to perfectly match domestic demand, preventing the oversupply and price crashes that plague farmers elsewhere. The second leg is price control. The government and farmer groups set the minimum price processors pay for milk. This guarantees a stable income for dairy farmers, insulating them from the wild swings of the global market. And the third leg, the one at the heart of this whole mess, is import control. To make the system work, Canada has to strictly limit how much foreign dairy gets in. It does this with tariff rate quotas, or TRQS. Under the USMCA, Canada let a small amount of U.S. dairy in tariff-free, about 3.6% of its market. But here's the kicker. Once that quota is full, any extra imports get hit with astronomical tariffs. We're talking 241% to nearly 300% on products like butter. These aren't just taxes, they're fortress walls. For American dairy farmers who live in a hyper-co-competitive, export-driven world, this Canadian system is endlessly frustrating. They see a lucrative $20 billion market next door full of consumers who would gladly buy their products, but it's locked behind a protectionist wall. They argue Canada's system isn't just protecting farmers. It's artificially inflating prices for Canadian consumers and locking out American competition. And for a president like Donald Trump, this system is more than an irritant. It's a red flag. The fragile peace over North American trade was shattered in early 2025. With Donald Trump back in the Oval Office, the USMCA, the very deal he championed, was put under a microscope. His administration made it clear the upcoming 2026 joint review of the agreement wasn't going to be a routine checkup. It was going to be a full-blown renegotiation, and dairy was at the top of the hit list. The ultimatum didn't come through quiet diplomatic channels, but through the president's signature megaphone, public declarations, and stern warnings from his U.S. Trade Representative, Jamieson Greer. The message was blunt. The days of Canada's protected dairy market were over. Trump demanded nothing less than total, unimpeded access for American producers. It wasn't just about tweaking the quotas. The U.S. argument had gotten more sophisticated. American officials and powerful lobby groups argued that Canada was violating the spirit of the USMCA, even if it was technically following the letter of the law. They pointed out that Canada was giving the tariff-free import quotas mainly to Canadian dairy processors. These processors, who already benefit from high prices, have zero incentive to actually import American products and compete with themselves. It was a loophole, they screamed, a clever trick to keep the door shut. This simmering frustration now had the full, explosive backing of the White House. 74 bipartisan members of Congress sent a letter to USR Greer demanding he use the 2026 review to finally tear down Canada's dairy walls. The American dairy industry, facing its own struggles, saw the Canadian market as a lifeline. For them, this wasn't just trade theory, it was about survival. Trump, sensing a powerful issue for his base, framed it in stark populist terms. He painted a picture of hardworking American farmers being horribly treated by a protectionist Canada, resurrecting his famous complaints about a 270% tariff to shock and anger his supporters. The demand was clear. Either Canada voluntarily dismantles its dairy fortress, or he would use the full power of the U.S. government to smash it open. The clock was ticking towards the 2026 review, which now looked less like a checkpoint and more like an execution date for the entire agreement. As the storm gathered south of the border, a new leader stood on the parapets in Ottawa. Mark Carney, a man known more for navigating Goldman Sachs and the Bank of England than the political trenches, had just won a surprising victory, leading the Liberals to form a minority government. His reputation was that of a globalist, a financial technocrat, but he was about to face a political test more dangerous than any financial crisis. Carney's political reality was shaky. As head of a minority government, he depended on other parties to stay in power. Crucially, the Bloc Québécois, whose entire purpose is defending the interests of Quebec. And in Quebec, dairy is a sacred institution. The province is home to nearly half of all Canadian dairy production, and its powerful lobby holds immense sway. The value of a single quota, the right to milk one cow, can top $50,000. This isn't just farming, it's a multi-billion-dollar asset class. For the Bloc Québécois and much of Carney's own party, any concession on dairy was political suicide. But Prime Minister Carney's problem wasn't just political, it was legal. Just as trade tensions hit a boiling point, the Canadian Parliament passed an extraordinary piece of legislation, Bill C-202, pushed by the Bloc and supported by members from all parties terrified of the dairy lobby. This bill was a masterstroke of defensive policy. It was a legislative shield built for this exact scenario. Bill C-202 amended Canada's trade laws with a simple yet profoundly powerful rule. It made it illegal for any Canadian government to make concessions on supply management in any future trade negotiation. The law explicitly forbids increasing import quotas or lowering the sky-high tariffs on overquoted dairy, poultry, or eggs. In an instant, Mark Carney's hands were tied. He was legally blocked from giving Donald Trump what he wanted. He couldn't offer more access. He couldn't lower the tariffs. Doing so would mean breaking Canadian law. When Trump issued his ultimatum, Carney couldn't negotiate even if he wanted to. He was trapped between an immovable object, a new Canadian law, and an unstoppable force. An American president determined to get his way. Carney's response, therefore, couldn't be one of compromise. It had to be one of defiance. The stage was now fully set for a brutal head-on collision. With Canada legally unable to bend, Donald Trump decided he would try to break it. The first few months of 2025 turned into a terrifying game of economic brinkmanship, pushing the two allies closer to an all-out trade war than at any point in modern history. It began in late January. Citing a national emergency, Trump invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, EPA, a rarely used law that gives the president broad authority to regulate commerce. He threatened a blanket 25% tariff on virtually all Canadian goods. The threat was so catastrophic that it prompted a fragile truce and frantic negotiations. But the core issue of dairy remained an unbridgeable chasm. The truce didn't last. On March 4, 2025, the hammer fell. The Trump administration moved forward with the 25% tariffs. While some goods under the USMCA were temporarily exempt, the move sent a shockwave across the economy. It was a clear signal. The old rules no longer applied, but that was just the opening shot. On March 7th, Trump delivered his most direct threat yet: reciprocal tariffs. The U.S. would match dollar for dollar Canada's own dairy tariffs. Those same 241% to 298% tariffs Canada used for protection would be turned back on them. The move was largely symbolic in an economic sense, as Canada exports very little dairy to the U.S. But the political message was devastating. It was a declaration of total economic warfare. Canada's response was swift and defiant. Trade Minister Mary declared the tariffs completely unjustified. There was no panic, no surrender. Instead, Ottawa prepared for battle. The very next day, the Carney government unveiled a massive $6.5 billion aid package, the Trade Impact Support Program, to cushion the blow for affected industries. Canada was digging in for a long, painful fight. The rhetoric from Washington only grew hotter. By March 12th, U.S. senators were publicly accusing Canada of exploiting loopholes, providing political cover for even more aggression. The Trump administration signaled broader tariffs could come by April, poisoning cross-border business with uncertainty. The diplomatic language was gone, replaced by the vocabulary of a street fight. The firestorm had been ignited. This is a story with incredible stakes, and it's unfolding right now. If this video is helping you see international trade more clearly, take a second to give it a like so other people can find it too. And if you want to stay ahead of these major economic showdowns, make sure you subscribe for more straight talk explanations. This story is far from over. While the headlines screamed about milk and cheese, the real fear spreading through boardrooms on both sides of the border was about collateral damage. This wasn't a contained dispute. It was a contagion threatening to infect the entire deeply integrated North American economy. The fight over a $20 billion dairy market was putting a $1.3 trillion trade relationship at risk. The first and most immediate victims were ironically American dairy farmers, the very people Trump claimed he was fighting for. As the tariff battle created chaos at the border, reports emerged of massive shipments of American dairy products being rejected. In one shocking incident, a full $3 billion worth of U.S. milk and cheese destined for Canada under the existing quota system was turned away. This created an instant catastrophic surplus in the U.S. milk with nowhere to go, flooded the domestic market, and prices plummeted. For American dairy farms already on razor-thin margins, it was a nightmare. Stories of financial ruin began to surface. While retailers held massive fire sales just to clear out inventory, the attempt to pry open the Canadian market had boomeranged, causing chaos at home. All this while Canada, ironically, now held a dairy trade surplus with the U.S. of around $1 billion. Beyond the dairy aisle, the anxiety was palpable. The North American economy isn't just a collection of trading partners, it's a single continental factory floor. Supply chains for everything from cars to computers crisscross the border multiple times. A part might be made in Ohio, shipped to Ontario for assembly, sent to Quebec for finishing, and then back to the U.S. for sale. The leaders of these industries watched in horror. A group of 150 top U.S. industry leaders, including the CEO of General Motors, penned an urgent letter begging for stability. They warned that the tariffs and the potential collapse of the USMCA would shatter these intricate supply chains, leading to production halts, soaring costs, and job losses. A 25% tariff wasn't just a tax. It was a wrecking ball aimed at the heart of North American manufacturing. The ripple effects were turning a trade skirmish into a potential economic tidal wave. In the heat of a trade war, it's easy to paint the other side as irrational. It's easy to frame supply management as a bizarre system that gouges consumers to enrich a few farmers. But to truly understand this fight, we have to understand the best case for why this system exists and why Canada defends it with such ferocious loyalty. So, where did it come from? The system was born in the 1970s out of chaos. Before supply management, Canadian dairy farmers were at the mercy of wild price swings and a destructive cycle of surpluses and shortages that drove thousands of families off their farms. Supply management was the solution. Farmers agreed to limit their production, and in exchange, the government guaranteed a stable price and protection from the volatile global market. The core argument is stability. For farmers, it means they can invest and plan for the future without fearing that a price crash in New Zealand will wipe them out. It has preserved the family farm model in Canada to a degree lost in many other countries. A dairy quota isn't just a license. It's a retirement plan, a family inheritance, and the foundation of rural wealth. Defending supply management is seen as defending the social and economic fabric of rural Canada. Proponents also argue it benefits the whole country. The system requires no government subsidies. Unlike in the US and Europe, where taxpayers spend billions on farm supports, the Canadian system is self-funded. It also ensures a consistent, high-quality domestic supply of fresh dairy, a matter of food sovereignty many Canadians take seriously. This fierce defense has been tested in court. The U.S. has repeatedly challenged Canada's handling of dairy quotas. The history here is complex. In a 2022 ruling, a dispute panel sided with the U.S., agreeing that Canada's method of allocating import quotas primarily to its own processors violated the agreement. Canada made adjustments, but Washington felt they were cosmetic and launched a second challenge. However, in a crucial 2.1 decision in late 2023, a new panel ruled in favor of Canada, validating its current practices. This ruling emboldened Ottawa, giving it the legal justification to claim its system, while restrictive was compliant with the trade deal. So when Mark Carney says supply management isn't on the table, he's defending a system seen by millions as a pillar of economic stability, a guarantor of the family farm, and a cornerstone of national food security. He's standing on decades of political precedent and a recent international legal victory. This isn't just stubbornness, it's a calculated defense of a foundational national policy. Faced with an economic siege, Prime Minister Mark Carney didn't just bunker down, he launched a multi-front counteroffensive, a brutal response that was strategic, audacious, and designed to change the power dynamics of the relationship. It was a masterclass in economic statecraft, leveraging his background in global finance to insulate Canada and expose America's own vulnerabilities. Carney's strategy wasn't a tit-for-tat tariff war he knew Canada couldn't win. It was about making the United States less relevant to Canada's economic future. The cornerstone was radical trade diversification. While Trump built walls, Carney built bridges to everywhere else. The first stunning move was a massive $70 billion investment deal signed with the United Arab Emirates. This wasn't just a trade pact, it was a strategic partnership that injected a colossal amount of capital into the Canadian economy for energy, tech, and infrastructure. It was a clear signal to Washington. Canada's financial future would no longer be solely dependent on American investment. This was followed by a flurry of other deals. Carr's government aggressively pursued new pacts with Qatar and even China, lowering tariff barriers and opening new markets. The stated goal was to double non-U.S. exports. It was an explicit pivot away from North America toward the faster-growing markets of Asia and the Middle East. The results were dramatic. Within a year, Canada's exports to countries other than the United States had surged, nearly doubling as projected. Simultaneously, exports to the U.S. had plummeted by 10%. The magnetic pull of the American market on the Canadian economy was weakening. Domestically, Carney's government shored up its defenses. The $6.5 billion trade impact support package was just the start. The government also rolled out a $200 million domestic food processing fund, a clever move to help Canadian dairy processors become more efficient without touching supply management. It was framed as an investment in Canadian food security, a popular move that further insulated the industry. Carney himself took to the world stage. As a former governor of the Bank of England, his voice carried weight. He didn't engage in name-calling with Trump. Instead, he delivered calm, firm speeches in Davos and London, fact-checking the president's claims and framing Canada's position not as protectionism, but as a sovereign choice. He spoke the language of global finance, reassuring investors that Canada was stable, even as its southern neighbor embraced chaos. This combination of massive diversification, strategic domestic support, and calm diplomacy was the brutal response. It wasn't a single punch, but a series of calculated maneuvers that fundamentally altered the chessboard. Carney was showing Trump that the old leverage, the threat of being cut off from the U.S. market, was losing its power. The escalation and Carney's counteroffensive have set the stage for the ultimate showdown. A moment of truth, hardwired into the USMCA itself, the Sunset Clause. This clause mandates a joint review of the entire agreement every 6 years. The first of these reviews is scheduled for July 1st, 2026. This is the ticking time bomb at the center of the North American economy. During that review, any one of the 3 countries can signal their intent to withdraw. If a country isn't satisfied and a new deal can't be reached, the agreement begins a 10-year countdown to its own termination. Donald Trump has seized on this clause as his ultimate weapon. He has repeatedly threatened to not extend the agreement unless his dairy demands are met. For him, the 2026 review is the point of maximum leverage. He's betting that when faced with the potential economic oblivion of a post-USMCA world, Canada will have no choice but to sacrifice its dairy industry. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer has made it explicit, telling Congress that Washington will not extend the agreement without resolving specific and structural issues with dairy at the top of the list. But Prime Minister Mark Carney, bolstered by his diversification strategy and the legal wall of Bill C-202, is calling Trump's bluff. The surge in non-U.S. exports and investment has given Carney a confidence no previous Canadian leader has ever had in a trade dispute with the U.S. He is betting that the American business community, especially the auto and manufacturing sectors, will never allow the White House to actually pull the trigger. For Carney, the pleas from 150 U.S. industry leaders are proof that the pain of a USMCA collapse would be felt just as deeply, if not more so, south of the border. This has created a terrifying standoff. 2 leaders, each convinced of their position's strength, are hurtling towards a deadline that could unravel 50 years of economic integration. What happens if the time bomb goes off? North American trade would revert to older World Trade Organization rules. The seamless tariff-free movement of goods would vanish. The economic fallout would be devastating, likely triggering a recession in all 3 countries. Until now, that future was unthinkable. But in this high-stakes game of chicken, the unthinkable is now firmly on the table. We are standing on the edge of a precipice. On one side, President Donald Trump armed with the power to detonate the USMCA, demanding the complete surrender of Canada's dairy market. He's driven by a powerful political narrative and believes Canada's economic reliance on the U.S. is its fatal weakness. On the other side, Prime Minister Mark Carney, legally prohibited from conceding, politically backed by a powerful lobby, and increasingly insulated by a bold strategy of global diversification. He's betting that America needs stable North American trade just as much as Canada does. The entire framework of North American commerce now hinges on this single intractable dispute. This is no longer a simple disagreement over agriculture. It's a fundamental test of power, sovereignty, and the future of global trade. The showdown is set for 2026, but the shockwaves are already here. We are left with the most uncertain question in modern trade relations. Who will blink first? Is Trump's brinkmanship a bluff, or is he truly willing to risk a continental recession to win this fight? And is Carney's brutal response a sustainable strategy for independence or a dangerous gamble? I want to know what you think. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.